You noticed it first in small ways. A conversation that used to feel comfortable started to feel hollow. A celebration you had been looking forward to arrived, and somewhere in the middle of it, you found yourself watching from a slight distance, as if you were a guest at your own life rather than its inhabitant. You smiled at the right moments. You said the right things, but something inside you had shifted quietly, without your permission, and it never quite shifted back. The world did not change. The people around you did not change. But you could no longer unsee what you had begun to see, and seeing it, you discovered, does not make you happier. It makes you lonelier in a way that is almost impossible to explain to anyone who has not felt it. This is what no one tells you about waking up. They speak of it as liberation, as light, as arrival. And in some sense, it is all of those things, but it is also the beginning of a particular kind of difficulty, one that does not go away with time, one that cannot be solved with more knowledge or more meditation or more effort at acceptance. You have probably tried those things. You have probably tried to go back, to return to the comfortable certainty you once lived inside, only to find that the door behind you has disappeared. There is no way back. And this video is about why that is not a tragedy, even though it almost always feels like one. If this is opening something up for you, consider subscribing. I explore these territories every week, and I would be honored to have you along for the journey. Let us begin with what we actually mean when we talk about consciousness, because the word has been so thoroughly misused that it risks meaning nothing at all. We do not mean here some cosmic expansion of awareness, some mystical state achieved through breathwork or isolation tanks. We mean something far more ordinary and far more consequential. We mean the capacity to see the patterns behind experience, to recognize not just what is happening, but why it is happening, to notice the mechanisms at work beneath the surface of your own thoughts and feelings and choices. We mean the willingness to look at yourself honestly, without flinching, without the comfortable story that you have been telling yourself about who you are and why you do what you do. That is consciousness as a lived practice. And it turns out, that practice has costs that no one in the spiritual industry is particularly eager to discuss. Hannah Arendt wrote extensively about the life of the mind, about what happens when a human being turns inward and begins to think seriously about their own existence. She was not a spiritual writer in any conventional sense. She was a political philosopher, a thinker preoccupied with action and public life, with what it means to be human among other humans. But she understood something about the relationship between deep thought and a certain kind of suffering that is directly relevant here. She understood that genuine thinking, real examination, the kind that does not stop at convenient answers, that kind of thinking is inherently disruptive. It disrupts the comfortable agreements we make with ourselves and with our culture. And once disrupted, those agreements cannot simply be reinstated by deciding to believe them again. This is the first thing to understand about the unhappiness of conscious people. It is not a malfunction. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong with their development, or that they have taken a wrong turn somewhere. It is a structural consequence of seeing clearly. When you stop accepting the inherited frameworks through which most people experience their lives, when you see through the social performances, the unconscious scripts, the anxious striving that passes for meaningful activity in ordinary life, you do not find peace waiting on the other side. You find, at least initially, a kind of vertigo. The floor you had been standing on was made of assumptions, and now you can see through it, and standing on it feels precarious in a way it never did before. Think about it this way. Imagine you have been watching a film that you believed was real. Not a film you knew was fiction and enjoyed as such, but a film you genuinely took to be the nature of reality itself. You were invested in the characters. You experienced real emotions about their fates. You organized your behavior around the logic of their world. And then someone shows you the projector. They show you the screen, the light, the mechanism behind the experience. You cannot simply go back to being immersed. You can sit in the theater. You can appreciate the craft. You can even feel moved at times. But something fundamental has changed in your relationship to the experience, and that change cannot be undone by trying harder to believe. I know many of you watching this have never been able to explain this feeling to anyone in your life. You have tried, maybe, and watched the blankness come over their faces. Or worse, watched them try to fix you, to reassure you that things are not that bad, that you should focus on gratitude, that you are overthinking it, and you smiled and nodded, because explaining further felt like more trouble than it was worth. How long have you been carrying this particular loneliness? The loneliness of seeing things that people around you simply do not see, and not knowing whether that makes you more awake or simply more miserable. Share in the comments, because someone else watching this right now needs to know they are not the only one. And if putting it into words feels hard, just type this: I thought I was the only one, because you are not, and neither are they. Now let us go deeper, because there is a misunderstanding embedded in this experience that makes it more painful than it needs to be. Most conscious people, once they begin to see clearly, assume that the task is to use that clarity to engineer a better life. They assume that insight is a tool, that understanding the patterns means you can now dismantle them and replace them with healthier ones, and that the result of this process will be something resembling contentment. This is a reasonable assumption. It is also largely incorrect, and the gap between what they expect and what they experience is a significant source of their unhappiness. The mistake is in believing that consciousness is instrumental, that it is for something, that its value lies in what it enables you to achieve or avoid or become. When you hold that belief, you are still inside the logic of the very seeking that created your suffering in the first place. You have simply made seeking itself more sophisticated. You are now seeking awakening, seeking peace, seeking liberation, with the same restless energy you once spent seeking success or validation or security. And consciousness, real consciousness, the kind we are talking about here, does not cooperate with that agenda. It is not a technology for self-improvement. It is something far stranger and far more fundamental than that. Arendt drew a distinction between what she called labor, work, and action. Labor is the endless biological cycle of production and consumption, the maintenance of life. Work is the creation of durable things, objects and institutions that outlast the moment of their making. But action is something else entirely. Action for Arendt is the dimension of human life in which we appear as who we are, in which we disclose ourselves to one another, in which something genuinely new can come into the world. And crucially, action is irreversible and unpredictable. You cannot control its outcomes. You can only act, disclose yourself, and then live with what that unleashes. I want to suggest that consciousness operates something like action in this sense. When you begin to see clearly, you are not acquiring a tool. You are undergoing a disclosure. Something about the nature of reality and your own nature within it is showing itself to you. And that disclosure, like action, is irreversible. It changes the space in which you exist, and it is unpredictable in its consequences, which is why you cannot simply decide in advance what it will do to your life, or your relationships, or your sense of meaning. The unhappiness that follows, and it does follow, is not the result of something going wrong. It is the result of something going right in a way that refuses to be comfortable. Think of the person who has spent years learning to see the manipulation behind advertising. Every time they encounter an advertisement, they cannot simply experience it naively. They see the structure, the appeal, the mechanism of desire being constructed. Is that person better off? In some important sense, yes. They are less likely to be manipulated. They relate to the consumer world with greater honesty. But they have also lost something: the simple pleasure of wanting something without knowing why, the innocent participation in a shared cultural experience. Consciousness has a cost, and the cost is a particular kind of innocence that you cannot get back by deciding to want it back. This is what the spiritual industry systematically misrepresents. It presents consciousness as a path to a state that resembles the very innocence it destroys. It promises that if you meditate enough, surrender enough, accept enough, you will arrive at a place of effortless joy, of seamless participation in life, of uncomplicated presence. And some people do experience something like this, sometimes in glimpses. But for most seriously conscious people, the dominant experience is not effortless joy. It is a kind of clear-eyed engagement with life that includes significant amounts of discomfort, grief, irony, and what we might call existential sobriety. Not depression, not despair, but a clear, unsentimental awareness of what is actually happening, including the suffering and the absurdity and the beauty and the loss, all at once, without the comfortable filters that once made it all more manageable. And here is where I want to offer something that might genuinely reframe this for you. The unhappiness of conscious people is not, primarily, a problem to be solved. It is a sign of something important, something that most people in human history have never had access to, not because they were worse or less evolved, but simply because the conditions of their lives did not create space for it. What conscious people have, in the midst of their discomfort, is something that Arendt would have recognized as genuine thoughtfulness. They are the people who cannot stop thinking, who cannot accept the inherited answers, who sit with questions that most people around them have never thought to ask. And this thoughtfulness, this refusal of easy comfort, is not a burden to be overcome. It is a form of fidelity to reality that has its own kind of dignity. If what I am sharing here touches something in you, something you have been living with but have not had language for, I want you to know that you are part of a community here that is asking the same questions. I create these explorations for people who are done with surface answers, who are willing to sit in the discomfort of seeing clearly. Consider subscribing if this resonates, not because you need another place to consume content, but because sometimes it matters to have companions who are thinking about the same things, who will not offer you easy fixes, who will simply explore alongside you. That is what this channel is, an ongoing conversation about what it actually means to be human and awake and willing to look honestly at all of it. There is a concept in Arendt's work that I find unusually useful here. She speaks of natality, by which she means not simply the biological fact of being born, but the capacity that birth represents, the capacity for genuine beginning, for introducing something new into the world that was not there before. Every human being, she argues, is a beginning, not just at the moment of birth, but continuously, in every act of genuine thought and genuine action. We are, by our very nature, capable of starting something that was not already underway. We are not merely effects of causes. We are also causes, beginnings, sources of genuine novelty in the world. I raise this because conscious people often experience their clarity as a kind of ending, as the closing off of the naive possibilities that less examined people still seem to have access to. They feel like they have arrived at a terminus, a place where they can see too much to be simply happy, too much to be simply anything. But natality suggests something different. It suggests that the very capacity for clear seeing, the very willingness to examine honestly, is itself a form of aliveness, a way of being in the world that has not yet exhausted its possibilities. The examined life is not a closed life. It is, in Arendt's terms, a life that remains open to genuine beginning, because it refuses the false completeness of inherited certainty. What does this look like in practice? It looks like the capacity to be genuinely moved by things, not because you have restored your innocence, but because clarity itself can be a kind of openness. The person who sees clearly does not stop caring. They care differently. They care without illusion, which is harder and also in some ways purer. They grieve without pretending the grief will end neatly. They love without requiring that love to mean what the culture scripts say it should mean. They find meaning not in the achievement of some permanent state of peace, but in the quality of their attention, in the depth of their engagement with whatever is actually in front of them. This is not happiness in the way that word is usually used, but it is something, and it is not nothing. There is a particular quality to the lives of people who have accepted this. They tend to be remarkably present, not in the performative way of someone who has decided to be mindful, but in the way of someone who has stopped expecting reality to be other than it is. They have given up a certain kind of hope. They hope that if they get something right, they will finally be released from the difficulty of being human. And in giving that up, they have gained something harder to name, a kind of grounded availability to what is real, a tolerance for ambiguity that allows them to stay present in situations where others flee into distraction or denial. They are the people you want with you in a crisis, not because they have answers, but because they do not need to pretend that everything is okay. And yet, and here is the thing I do not want to paper over, they are also the people who feel most acutely the grief of their situation. They see the suffering of the world without the buffer of denial. They see the unexamined lives around them, not with contempt, but with a kind of sad clarity, understanding why people choose not to see, understanding what the cost of seeing is, wishing sometimes that they too could choose not to know what they know. This grief is real. It is not a problem to be fixed. It is the appropriate emotional response to seeing clearly in a world that is genuinely difficult. Trying to get rid of it would be like trying to stop caring, which is not what consciousness asks of you. So let me come back to where we began. You are sitting in a moment or a life that used to feel one way and now feels another. You can see the film. You can hear the mechanism of the projector. You cannot go back to pure immersion, and you have probably stopped trying. You are asking, not always consciously, whether this is what it was supposed to feel like, whether this is what all that seeking and questioning was leading toward, whether the reward for seeing clearly is simply the burden of having to see clearly forever. And I want to say to you, as directly as I know how, that you are asking the right question, and that the right question is better than the wrong answer. The people around you who seem happier, some of them are genuinely at peace in ways you are not. But many of them are simply not yet asking. And the not asking has its own costs, costs that come due later, costs that are paid in a different currency. You have already paid a price. What you have received in return is not happiness. It is something rarer and, I would argue, more durable. It is the capacity to live with what is real, in all its difficulty and all its strange, unexpected grace. What you notice after a while, living inside this kind of consciousness, is that the moments of genuine connection, the moments when something true passes between you and another person, or between you and the world, those moments have a quality that no amount of naive happiness can approximate. They are clean. They are clear. They are not mediated by the need for things to mean more than they mean, or to last longer than they last. They are what they are, and what they are is enough, not in a resigned way, but in a way that is actually alive to the sufficiency of the real. This is not the happiness you were promised, but it is not nothing. It is, in fact, a great deal. If what we have been exploring together here has resonated with something you have been living quietly, something you have not been able to put into words, I want you to know that you are not alone in it. There is a community here of people who are done with easy answers, who have accepted the cost of seeing clearly and are learning to find meaning inside that, rather than despite it. I make these videos as an ongoing companionship for that journey. If you want to be part of it, subscribe. Not out of obligation or impulse, but because you sense it would be useful to have a regular place to think these things through. And tell me in the comments what this brought up for you. Tell me where you are in this. I read every single comment, and your reflection often opens something I have not yet considered. The conversation that happens here matters. You matter in it. Here is what I want to leave you with. Arendt believed that the examined life was not a comfortable life, but it was a free life. Free in the only sense that really counts. Free from the tyranny of unexamined compulsion. Free to act from genuine understanding rather than inherited reflex. The unhappiness of conscious people is inseparable from this freedom. You cannot have the clarity without the cost. But you can, over time, stop relating to the cost as a sign that something has gone wrong. You can begin to understand it as the shape that freedom takes in a world that was not built for free people. And when you understand that, something shifts, not into happiness exactly, but into a kind of settled honesty that is its own reward. You were always going to be someone who could not stop looking. The question was never whether to see. The question was what to do with seeing. And you are still finding out. So is everyone here. That is the work. It has no end. And that, finally, is not a problem.